Okay, good evening. It is Monday, June 21st at 7:02 p.m. This is the second public hearing for the Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board. I'll start this meeting by reading the introductory notice. In response to the governor's directive to take every effort to keep New Yorkers safe and mitigate the spread of COVID-19, pursuant to Executive Order 202-1 and its updates, the Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board will be conducting public hearings to set guideline rates of rent adjustment, housing accommodations within its jurisdiction, subject to the ETPA, for leases commencing between October 1, 2021 and September 30th, 2022, via teleconference. Instructions for members of the public to simultaneously view or listen to the meeting have been posted to HCR's website for the Office of Rent Administration under the public hearings section prior to the meetings. Hearings will later also be transcribed and the public will have the ability to view the transcripts. So with that being said, Chair, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Elsa Rubin, Chair of the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board. I welcome you to this virtual meeting. This is the second of two public meetings to consider comments concerning rent adjustments for leases commencing or being renewed between October 1st, 2021 and September 30th, 2022. I will now take roll call. Please respond if you are present. Verlene Aqua, public member.
Here.
Lamont Bedreau, public member.
Here.
Eddie Mae Barnes, public member.
Here.
Elliot Cherson, owner representative.
Here.
Kenneth Finger, Kenneth representative.
I am here.
Sylvia Hammer, tenant representative.
Here.
Evelyn Santiago, public member.
Present.
Tamara Stewart, tenant representative.
Present.
And Elsa Rubin, public member, present. Let the quorum show that we have a quorum. Let the record show that we have a quorum. Our next virtual meeting will take place on Wednesday, June 23rd at 7 p.m. for the presentations of the tenant and owner representatives. Also, if anybody is watching online right now and wants to participate in this meeting, please let us know. If we have the opportunity, if we have the time, we will try to accommodate you. And I will now ask our counsel, Mr. Peter Stecker, to please give the instructions on how to, if people want to participate, how they can do it, and any other comments that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The instructions for anyone who would like to contact me to sign up for tonight is an email address of Westchester County RGB at nyshcr.org. And as I do every night, I will be monitoring this email address throughout the meeting in case somebody wants to sign up. They can send me an email. Other than that, I don't have any other announcements. I do note that we have 18 people signed up for tonight. So I did send you the list, Madam Chair, before the meeting, if you want to go ahead and call the first individual.
Yes. Before I call the speakers, I would like to ask everybody who comes to speak to introduce yourself and let the board know if you are representing yourself or an organization. Because if you are representing yourself, you have 3 minutes to speak. And if you are representing an organization, you have 5 minutes. Also, since we have many people coming today, we will stick very strictly to the time frame. And I apologize in advance if we have to cut you off. But we have to hear from, in all fairness, we have to hear from everybody who wants to come before us. I will now call the speakers in the order in which they signed up prior to this meeting. And first person is Tim Foley.
Okay, Chair. So there's somebody that I think they're raising their hand. It's not identified. So I'm going to let them speak and see if it's Mr. Foley.
Hello?
Good evening. Is that Mr. Foley? Oh, no,
No.
never mind. I actually see him in here as a different person. Thank you. Okay, I'm promoting Mr. Foley right now.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Am I okay to begin?
Yes.
All
go
right.
ahead. Just please, before you state if you are representing yourself or an organization.
I'm representing an organization.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. So my name is Tim Foley, and I'm the CEO of the Building and Realty Institute, which includes the Apartment Owners Advisory Council. You've heard many of our members throughout the first public session, and you will again tonight, but I wanted to give some county-wide observations which may be useful in assessing this year's unique circumstances for tenants and landlords. First, I want to emphasize how strongly and vigorously the BRI is encouraging our landlords to pull out all the stops to assist, nudge, cajole, and persuade their tenants who may qualify to sign up for the Emergency Rent Assistance Program, or ERAP. Many of our landlords supported their tenants' efforts to apply for relief under last year's far more limited state and county relief programs, only to be endlessly frustrated by the woefully inadequate and harshly restricted state program and the extremely long delays in receiving payments from the county's programs. It was frustrating for them and agonizing for many of their tenants. Through ERAP, there is 20 times as much money available as there was in all of 2020, and the administrative burdens and restrictive eligibility of last year have been substantially eased. The BRI pushed for this program in Albany. We've been in frequent contact with the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance and the City of Yonkers, and we're happy that BRI members Community Housing Innovations is one of the not-for-profits helping to sign up eligible tenants here in Westchester. And there's much more to be done, and we're deeply invested in doing what it takes to make it a success. But I also want to be clear what ERAP is not. It is not a windfall for landlords. It is not even new revenue. It clears out the arrears of tenants who are only in debt because of a financial hardship attributable to COVID-19. But essentially, for those tenants, it just gets us back to zero. Even if the program runs perfectly and all COVID-related arrears are covered, which we hope is the case, plus the projected 3 months for those who continue to be going through a financial hardship even as we come out of the pandemic, it doesn't begin to address the additional costs of the past year or projected future costs. Those can only be addressed through this process. It does not cover increases in property taxes, utilities, payroll, interest, and another increase in insurance at nearly 3 times the rate of inflation. There's nowhere else where those costs can be addressed except through the Rent Guidelines Board process. I also want to underline 2 unique circumstances this year, one for tenants and one for landlords. For those tenants who have suffered a financial hardship and qualify for ERAP, the benefits don't just end with the government paying their arrears and potentially 3 months of prospective rent. As part of the terms of ERAP, the landlord must agree to provide eviction relief for a year, as well as to freeze rent for a year. That means the tenants who experienced financial hardship last year and qualified for ERAP already will have their rent frozen for next year, no matter what this board decides. This is perhaps the only time that you will consider an appropriate level to increase rents, knowing that the tenants most in financial need already have another source of relief separate and apart from this process. Now, on the landlord side, the story is not so positive. You'll notice that one area where costs went down substantially last year was maintenance and repairs, but that's not a good sign. Within the context of the pandemic, many buildings deferred non-essential maintenance for months at a time, and that made sense given how frankly scared a lot of us were to let anyone outside of our family into our homes for any reason. In other cases, landlords put off repairs because money was tight, and they preferred to offer flexibility in payment plans or other accommodations to struggling tenants. But those needs for repairs didn't disappear, they were just deferred. They need to be caught up this year, if at all possible, or they'll start to impact the quality of life for tenants. Now, unfortunately, the cost of making these repairs is through the roof in an unprecedented way through the first few months of 2021. Due to a nationwide shortage, the price of lumber surged over 200% over the past 12 months, and that's bad enough, but it's also accompanied by shortages in nearly a dozen other building materials and supplies. 95% of home builders report they've had delays or difficulties getting the appliances they need for construction or renovations. The same is true for rosin-based paints, for foam, copper, steel, gypsum, plywood, windows, and doors. And every so often you might see a spike in one category of home improvement supplies from time to time.
Mr. Foley,
Yes.
could you please wrap up your 5 minutes? Thank you.
Absolutely. To have them all surge at once like this is truly unprecedented. We have no idea how long it will last. So we think the situations are ripe for a reasonable increase to cover, among other things, the cost of these supplies, knowing with security that those who went through a financial condition already have relief through ERAP. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Foley from the board? None? Thank you very much, Mr. Foley, for your presentation.
No, there was a question from Mark.
Oh, okay. A delay question.
I really just wanted to thank Mr. Foley for his organization encouraging owners to help tenants with filling out ERAP applications. I've talked to folks who are on the end of nonprofits that are trying to help folks. And it seems like some owners are helping their tenants and other ones not as much. So we appreciate your partnership in trying to get tenants out of arrears and to get owners the money that's rightfully due them. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question also.
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Foley. How are you tonight?
Good evening. How are you?
Okay. What is the BRI or the AOAC working with the county in some fashion to assist the tenants in getting this ERAB money?
Yeah, so the county just got us a whole bunch of flyers that we're going to distribute to all of our members in both English and Spanish for both landlords and tenants, again, advocating for this type of a program. We've been having some discussions with the county about possibly co-organizing some pop-up sites where if there's a particular area or we know that there's a particular set of buildings where there are tenants with a lot of arrears who for whatever reason are not working with their landlord or not working with the nonprofit, maybe we can get someone there. Really, at this point, we're open to any creative ideas. We're all in this together. It's going to help landlords. It's going to help tenants. The money is there, and it's there for this purpose, and it's not going to be there for future problems. So we need to make sure that as many people as we can make solid, we're doing so.
Is there a limitation on the amount of money under ERAB that a tenant can get in terms of the economics of the tenant?
So the main criteria is that they have to be at 80% of the area median income or below, and they need to have experienced some type of hardship. The documentation restraints on ERAP are much less than they were for the previous program. We know a lot of tenants applied. They jumped through a lot of hoops. They supplied a lot of documents. At the end of it, they were told, surprise, you're not eligible. And then they were just stuck. That's not the way, as we understand it, this program has been working. They are keeping it to the minimum to determine that you actually experience a loss of income or had higher healthcare costs or are taking care of a family member, some type of financial burden along those lines. Now, just so you know, we have also been pushing for some state money to be dedicated to tenants who are in substantial arrears, but who are above 80% AMI, because we know there are some people who are in that realm there, where they had an apartment that was completely affordable pre-COVID, and they had a loss of income, but they're now still struggling. You can't use federal dollars above that 80% threshold, so we're encouraging the state to step in.
Yeah, I believe Ms. Stewart had another question.
Mr. Foley, have your members, have you worked with your members to come up with, let's say, a list of tenants in different buildings that might qualify or that are behind in arrears? Like, are you guys keeping track so that, because one of the things that the nonprofits are, all they can do is wait for people to come to them and say, listen, I need some help, even as they try to get the word out in different communities that the program is available. The landlords have a much better sense of who's behind. Now, you may not know who, if the person, the tenants meet all the eligibility criteria, but it seems like there's an opportunity for the landlords to help those of us who are trying to help the tenants identify who may need help. And then maybe it's the nonprofits and tenant representatives and tenant advocates that could then approach tenants, because we're in many cases maybe a more trusted source for information to talk to them about why they might want to consider applying to the program. But you guys know better than we do who those people might be.
Well, I agree, and I think at a certain point we need to start taking a hard look at who hasn't applied. I know there are a lot of people who try to apply and they hit some technical snags here or there. The one area that we're also paying very close attention to is the city of Yonkers. The city of Yonkers is running its own program. They're confident that they know how to do that, working with some of the local nonprofits, because they think they can triangulate that way, but they do not have a web portal. So it's going to be a little bit harder, I think, to keep track of everybody in the city of Yonkers. So I don't think we'll have any choice but for landlords to sort of work with nonprofit agencies once we get through the initial flush of people applying, to figure out who the folks are who haven't applied for whatever reason. And see if we can't do things that are more targeted. If it involves, like I said, a pop-up session on the weekend or something where someone's just plunked down in a courtyard with some Wi-Fi and signing people up on the spot, we're happy to put some resources behind it, and we're willing to get as creative as we can.
Okay, I definitely know we have communication issues in Mount Vernon. I know Mount Vernon United Tenants is trying to do what they can, but my sense is that there's a tremendous need in the Mount Vernon community for help through the ERAP program, except that it's hard to get the word out to everyone who may need and qualify for the help. So whatever can be done in that regard would be good. I hope that the courts are trying to help us too. Like the people who are going on these Zoom calls to, their court appearances, I hope that there's something happening on that end, because that obviously they know who's being, hauled into court because, for non-payment.
Yeah, I can't say, I haven't heard what the courts are or not doing on this case, but I would agree. Any possible way we can get the word out, we need to take advantage of it.
I have one more question, Madam Chairwoman.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Foley, I may have missed it. If assuming we can get some money for tenants from the ERAP program, is it still necessary for this board to give some type of reasonable increase in rent?
In my opinion, yes, because as I said, the ERAP, it's important to clear out the arrears that came from COVID-19, but it doesn't take into account the fundamental charge of this, which is to make sure that costs ultimately are covered. I think in this year, in some ways, it is an easier case than in others precisely because of ERAP and because ERAP comes with strings attached for the landlord to the benefit of the tenant, specifically eviction relief and then freezing rents for a single year. You have some confidence that if someone has gone through the ERAP program because they suffered a financial difficulty, the state has already, in effect, frozen their rent for a year. So the only folks who are open for consideration, number one, are folks who didn't sign up for a two-year lease last year, which are not a lot, and also people who didn't have a financial condition that was covered by ERAP, which again means that they have some ability to float a reasonable, modest increase without the threat of financial hardship. And then fundamentally, for us, it's a question of the economics and the finances of maintenance and repairs have just started to break down in a way that's unsustainable. And many of my landlords, you've heard from some of them, including Carol Danziger the other night, really just don't even know how to make the math work on some of the basic repairs that they need to do. A lot of the financial supports that they relied on have been changed. They haven't figured out how to adapt to the new circumstances. They're not a corporation with a big, bankroll operating in multiple states behind them. A lot of these folks are local, born and bred here in Westchester, and are trying to figure things out as best as they can. So I think the case is honestly more clear-cut because if we continue to defer maintenance and repairs, no one's going to be happy. The tenants are really going to be furious. And the landlords, for their part, don't quite know how to make ends meet without some assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foley. I think we have to move on. I'm going to call the next.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Very quick question. Thank you. Mr. Foley, based upon what you just stated and your research, has your organization come up with any figures as to what you deem a fair guideline would be this year?
So we have our figures based on what the backlog of repairs are, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not even going to give you that number because I think it's certainly not on the cards. I think a reasonable increase would be based off of CPI. We know that CPI is around 2.6% this year. So something on the order of, let's say, a 3% increase for a 1 year and a 4.5 for a 2 year is something that is modest enough that if someone has not suffered a financial hardship, and again, those who have and go through ERAP have their rents frozen anyways, would be able to sustain it in this environment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Foley. And Peter, at this time, I'm going to call Emma Lofton Woods, representing the tenants.
Promoting her right now. Okay, Reverend Lofton Woods, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Good evening, Reverend.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good.
Can you state if you're representing yourself or an organization?
Well, I'm representing myself and my neighbors who are seniors like myself. So we just have a very small tenant group.
So is that an organization or an entity?
It's just an entity here in the cooperative. 3 minutes will be just fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I am Reverend Emma Lofton Woods, a former tenant representative on the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board. I am, and I know Mr. Cheerson, you don't want to hear this, but I'm a long-term rent stabilized tenant at 300 North Broadway in Yonkers. If I'm not mistaken, I think last year's guidelines were 0, 0, 0. All right. having been on this board for many years and having been a part of the zero increases several times, there is always an imbalance there for the leases that will expire the next year. An example, most of us here at 300 North Broadway, our leases are expiring in 2022. So we will not have the option of getting a zero unless this board votes for another zero this year. I am not asking this because we are facing financial hardships, because some of us are, but because I think it's right and it's just. I've been here 40 plus years, Mr. Kirsten. This year, since April, we have been without gas in the entire building. I heard the gentleman speak about maintenance. Well, maintenance and a lack thereof is what has us in the predicament we're in. There was a gas leak here, Con Edison shut the gas off. We have no means of preparing meals other than a hot plate. And I'm sure that Ms. Barnes knows what a hot plate is. It is difficult. It is a challenge, not only for us seniors, but for the families here that are ETPA renters. We are incurring additional electrical cost because we all have to go out and purchase electric appliances. There is no time frame as to when we will ever see gas or be able to operate our stoves, which have all been disconnected. So I appeal to the board this year to give us the balance and the benefit of what the tenants received last year because of various COVID hardships. I'm alive. I survived COVID by God's grace. I want to see next year, but I want to be able to pay my rent as well. And many of the seniors here, we've paid our rent throughout this COVID disaster, this pandemic. We've all paid our rent and we've tried our best to stay on top of it. But now we're incurring expenses that were beyond our control. I ask you all again, think about the other half that did not get the zero from last year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Reverend.
Yes, ma'am.
How many people live in your unit?
This is a cooperative.
In
There's
your club?
about 12 ETPA. There's 70 families, and none of us have any gas right now.
Since when you said?
April 15, Con Edison disconnected our building from the main gas line on North Broadway. There, they speak of maintenance. They knew that there was a gas leak, but because of an ineffective board that does not know how to run a cooperative, they ignored us renters. They did nothing until Con Edison came in and discovered the leak for themselves. Our lives were in jeopardy for over a year, but by God's grace, we didn't have an explosion. But now it's $100,000 worth of repairs that the shareholders, including the one that owns my unit, will have to bear. But we're all suffering the inconvenience of not being able to feed our families the way that we once did. It costs a lot of money to have Uber and all those, not Uber, but Grab, whatever those places. I can't use them because it costs too much money. So ordering in is not an option for many of us. I want y'all to take that into consideration. It's not just COVID, it's everyday life that we're living and trying to live. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Reverend? Yes, Mr. Sherson. You're on mute.
Okay. Reverend Woods, Lofton Woods, it's very good to see you.
How are you, Mr. Chairson?
I'm good, and it's very good to see you.
I survived. I survived.
I can see that. I just have a real quick question for you. I just want to clarify to make sure there's no misunderstanding amongst the board members or anybody else for that matter. The gas in your building has been turned off for all of the units.
Every one of them.
Right. So even if a person owns it, they're a cooperator, they have no gas either. This is not confined to just ETPA rentals, correct?
No,
Okay, I just want to thank you very much.
no,
Appreciate it.
no, the stoves have been disconnected. And we are blessed to be able to have hot water, and that's it. But it affects the entire residence.
Yeah, Mr. Finger?
I just wanted to say it's good to see you,
Hey,
Reverend.
hey,
Uh,
hey.
I'm glad you're well, you look happy.
Well,
And,
it was touch and go there. They did not expect me to pull through, but there's someone greater than man. She got too much to say. We can't shut her up right now.
we know that there's no way you wouldn't pull through in flying colors. It is really nice to see you again, and all our best.
Come and join me July the 10th. We're gonna celebrate life. I sent the email already.
Knock on wood, we're all trying.
Hallelujah. Y'all do what you do and do it good, okay? Take good care.
Thank you, Reverend.
Take good
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank
And
you.
it's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Take good care.
Peter, I'm going to call Fernando Barbosa.
Chair, I do not see Mr. Barbosa in here.
So the next person I have in the list is Lisa DeRosa.
Yes, I'm going to promote her right now. Mr. Rosa, can you hear us?
And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
But we can't see you.
I don't know.
There we go.
Now we can see you.
Yeah, a shining light.
Shining light from above.
Thank you. Ms. Rosa, are you representing yourself or an organization?
I'm representing an organization.
Which organization is that?
I'm representing my company, DeRosa Builders, and I am representing the Building and Realty Institute as the first female president.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Lisa DeRosa. Many of you on the board have heard my testimony each year, but this year it's both in my role as a landlord for a multi-generational apartment owner, DeRosa Builders, and as not just the president, but the first female president, sorry, I had to say it again, of the Building and Realty Institute. This is a special honor for me because my father had been president of the BRI in 1968, and my mother was president of the Women's Council of the BRI back when there was such a thing. I bring this up because it cements something I've always found to be true. The landlords that come before you each year were not faceless corporations, fly-by-night investors, or people looking to make a quick buck. We have deep roots in our communities. We have deep connections with many of our tenants, and we're dedicated to investing in our buildings to keep them in good condition and the type of apartments our residents deserve, want, and will hopefully want to live in for a long time. There has been a lot of talk about ERAP. We are very grateful for the aid, and we are doing whatever it takes to get our tenants signed up. We know many of them were in tough situations, not because of anything they did, but because of COVID-19. But I want to be clear about what ERAP is not. It is not a windfall. It is not new money. In fact, accepting the aids, we have to agree not to raise rents on those tenants for 1 year. So over the year, it's technically less money. It pays off the debts and the arrears from 2020. If it works perfectly, it only gets us back to zero. Like many landlords, I postponed some repairs and improvements in my buildings, including installing energy efficient windows on rent stabilized units when HSTPA passed in 2019, because it wasn't clear how I would be able to pay for them under the new rules. When landlords cancel or postpone repairs, everyone loses. The contractors, which are almost always local, lose the work. The tenants do not receive the improvements that the landlord wants to do, and nobody wins when the condition of the building deteriorates. I I had some IAI requests in the works when the new law passed, and it's honestly been a quagmire trying to be in compliance. For example, landlords were not informed until February of 2020 that before and after pictures were needed for IAIs. And it was not until very recently, a full 2 years after the law was passed, that we had the full ability to be in compliance. Like many landlords, I had to postpone other repairs for many months of 2020 because of COVID. My tenants weren't comfortable with workers being in their apartments, and the local contractors and my superintendents were not thrilled with the idea of going into apartments and exposing themselves to risk. But all of those repairs and improvements can't be put off forever without harming the quality of life of my tenants and the condition of my buildings. They have to be done. They also have to be done now, when the sticker shock of huge price increases and shortages has got me again wondering how we're going to pay for lumber, for plywood, for doors and windows, for paints, and especially for appliances. That is, if you can actually get them. It's crazy right now, and we don't know how much longer it will be like this. We are asking for an increase because honestly, we have nowhere else to go. We used to be able to cross-subsidize jumps in costs like this through vacancy bonuses, through fully reimbursed IAIs, for reasonable repayments related to MCIs, or from some flexibility from market rate tenants or even commercial tenants helping to subsidize rent stabilized units. Well, HSTPA did in vacancy bonuses, IAIs, and MCIs under the old formulas. I've been as flexible as I can be with my market rate tenants dealing with situations arising out of COVID-19. And I had a period last year when my vacancy rate was the highest it had ever been, including the financial downturn of 2008. The commercial rental market has been even worse. It's a disaster right now. When we come before you as landlords and discuss IAIs, MCIs, and vacancy increases, we bring these items up with the full knowledge that you cannot make any changes. We know that. However, we bring this up to remind you that fair guideline increases from this board are currently the only way we can maintain our properties. If you look hard enough, you can find examples of bad landlords. You can also find bad tenants, crooked politicians, unethical doctors, and unprincipled lawyers. There are no doubt bad apples in any industries. The property owners that care enough to come before you this evening do not compromise that minority population. We are the ones who have worked and sacrificed in care. There is pride in what we do and how we do it. And in order to do what we do so well, or even mediocre, we need the funds to maintain our buildings, and the only means we have is this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DeRosa, I have a question for you. How many buildings and how many units do you have?
We have 3 buildings comprising 403 units.
Thank you.
I have
Any question? Yes, Mr. Finger.
Mr. Rosa, you mentioned putting in sustainability, green type of repairs or construction. Were you able to do that?
We started the project and we've stopped it part of the way through. We've stopped all projects. If it's not absolutely falling down in a safety issue, it's not getting done.
Any other question? Yes, Mr. Chairson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rosa. Can you give us some examples of those projects specifically that you've had to either postpone or cancel?
We were putting in new double pane windows in a building built in 1971 that had single pane windows. That was a terrible source of heat loss. We started to put the windows in when HSTPA passed. We were only putting them in the deregulated units, and since then we've stopped it altogether. Our window contractor is a local company. We only use local companies. He lost the business. He lost a tremendous amount of income every year from us canceling this project. We have a leaking roof that I'm hoping that we can patch very inexpensively, because it's in a building that did a lot of brickwork for leaks that were coming in, and that building's in debt. I mean, there's no place for me to go to get money on this building.
Would your preference be to replace that roof?
Yes, I believe I'm coming up on about 25 years with that roof. It's our first leak, so I think right now what we would do is we would patch it until the leaks got to the point where we would need to replace the whole roof. But you're talking about a very large building with 100,000 units. You know, this board talks about small landlords and large landlords. I'm a medium-sized landlord. I don't fit into any category. But when you have a 100-unit building, you have a tremendous, tremendous roof. It's not a small repair. It's a major mid-six-figure repair to put a new roof in.
How would you pay for that? Replacing it?
How would I pay for it? I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't. You know, in the past, we've been able to, you know, refinance buildings, pull out equity. We put a tremendous amount aside for improvements and maintenance of the buildings. My father built these buildings in the 60s and 70s. My name is on everything in these buildings, from the ladders to the garbage cans. There's a tremendous amount of pride. I lost both my parents back to back in 16 and 17. So it's very important for me to maintain these buildings to honor my father. I also have 12 families that rely on me to keep a roof over their head, to feed their families, for health insurance, for their livelihood. That's also a tremendous responsibility. And I cannot make a wrong move in the business and jeopardize these people's livelihoods. They're my superintendents, they're my office staff, they're good, dedicated employees, and I need to make sure that my business continues for them as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else has a question? Thank you very much, Mr. Rosa.
Thank you for having me.
Peter, I'm going to call Genevieve Roche, if she's available.
Yes, I'm promoting her right now.
How do I get the camera going? Let's see, start video. Is that worth? There we go.
There you are.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And for those who don't know, Ms. Roche, she used to be a member of this board representing the tenants. So Ms. Roche, are you representing yourself or an entity?
No, I'm representing Mount Vernon United Tenants.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Genevieve Roche, and I'm testifying tonight on behalf of Mount Vernon United Tenants. There is no way I can possibly go through all the material in my written statement and supporting handouts in my allotted 5 minutes, but I do hope you will take the time over the next week to go through the materials deliberatively, because the research conclusively confirms the following 3 points. 1, this year's renewing tenants need just as much as last year's did a rent freeze while they dig themselves out of the devastating and disproportionate economic impact of the pandemic, and as they begin the slow climb back to pre-pandemic levels of employment. There is no reason not to do this when landlords' net operating income was a robust 38.72% last year, despite various factors they predicted, wrongly, would be devastating to their bottom line. 2, we are all aware of how serious the affordable housing crisis was even before COVID-19 shut down jobs in the service industries where most low-income renters work. 3, the disproportionate impact of the pandemic and nascent recovery hit low-income workers hardest. Tenants have used up their savings, maxed out their credit cards to forestall evictions that may come anyway if the eviction moratorium expires before ERAP funds can be processed and distributed. Now would be the worst possible time to inflict higher rents when it is neither warranted nor justified. Point 1. Owner NOI continued its escalation for a 5th straight year, averaging a very solid 38.4 average and jumping more than 3% notwithstanding the pandemic, a nearly 11% drop in rent stabilized units, last year's rent freeze that affected fourth quarter renewals, and the effective HSTPA's elimination of a year and a half's worth of vacancy increases and permanent MCIs and IAIs. In hindsight, Unnecessary rent increases passed in both 2019 and 2020 2018 and 2019 contributed to the escalation of NOI to levels not seen since 2002, 20 years ago. But tenant unemployment in Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and New Rochelle, where 73% of ETPA renters live, hit the 20% levels of Metro New York City and, like New York City, still remain at twice their pre-pandemic levels. 2. The worsening severe lack of affordable housing persists and has been exacerbated by the frustrating escalation of market rents at the bottom quartile due to shortages, while rents for overdeveloped luxury rental housing have declined. There is a shortage of more than 600,000 units in Westchester for extremely low incomes. And even for those making 50% of area median income, 75% pay more than 30% and a third pay more than 50% of income for rent. Even rent-stabilized rents now exceed housing wages. The average stabilized rent is now $1,514, which, to be considered affordable, requires an income of more than $60,000, 150% of the average renter wage of $40,000. Put another way, the average stabilized rent consumes 45% of the average renter wage. Even more telling, the average 2- and 1-year renewal rents last year required respective incomes of $64,000 and $74,000, consuming 48 to 56% of the average renter wage. These figures are the very definition of severely rent burdened. 3. The disproportionate, uneven impact of the pandemic and nascent recovery demand a rent freeze for those who did not get it last year. There has been no shortage of reports on how the pandemic hit low-wage workers the hardest. Over 50% of jobs were lost in 3 industries: hotel and food, retail trade, and healthcare services, sectors that account for the largest share of low-income renter households who often struggle to pay their rent even when times are good. And the recovery for low-wage workers will also be tough while the upper half prospers. The high number of failed small businesses, which disproportionately employ lower-paid workers, has led to permanent layoffs. And even those lucky enough to have been called back from furlough will still have considerable difficulty paying off past due bills and catching up with delayed rent payments, given that their incomes were already insufficient to meet their housing and other basic needs. Conversely, the wealthier kept jobs who were able to work remotely and increased their savings during the pandemic shutdown of retail, restaurants, and travel, not to mention the galloping stock market. They are also benefiting from the recovering labor shortage. Wall Street law firms boosted salaries, starting salaries for newbies to over $200,000, and it was just reported today that bankers are being poached with extravagant pay packages to meet the pent-up demand for deal work. This, while the lower quartile of earners got the monumental boost to a minimum wage of $14 an hour, enough to afford a non-existent rent of $928, but far, far less than needed to pay the average stabilized rent of $1,514.
Ms. Rush,
Yes,
can you please wrap up?
I am doing
5
so.
minutes.
I urge you in the strongest terms to not leave out those tenants up for renewal this year. They too have to somehow make it through another year as the bottom half slowly recovers. Life was hard enough before the pandemic. Let's not add insult to injury, and let's freeze rents for the second half of pandemic-hit tenants this year.
Thank you. Any questions from the board for Ms. Rush? No questions?
I might add, Elsa, I am available all week if anyone has any questions on the materials that I submitted. I realize you didn't get them until today.
Yes, we got it this afternoon. I didn't have time to go through everything. I skimmed through some of it, but I definitely will give you a call.
Please do. I welcome it.
Thank you. Peter? Tamara has a question for you.
Hi, Genevieve.
Hi, Tamara.
Can you please address the concern that we've been hearing from owners about the materials and how expensive it's going to be for them to make their repairs, and claiming that they must have 3 or 4% increase because of the materials cost?
I address it every year, and I address it in more detail in my materials. It's not the cost, the expenses, it's their net operating income after expenses that is relevant. And for 5 years running, it's been over 38%, close to 39%. That's the highest it's been since 2002. The rent increases, hindsight shows the rent increases of the past few years, obviously except for last year, were not warranted. All it has done is contribute to the escalating not net operating income. So while I appreciate the discussion about expenses, as I argue every year, that is not relevant unless there were some real issue with them having any net operating income. And quite frankly, people who own rent-stabilized units in a downturn economy have a fixed, rents don't go down for them, right? They have it fixed, and as they're pointing out, ERAP's going to try to help make them whole. So no, that argument, to my mind, holds absolutely no water.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Lamont.
I'm sure that this is probably available in the written materials. But what do you use as a source for your data to collect the balance statements or the
What do I use to do what?
numbers and the data for the
The source of the data every year has been the DHCR data that is supplied by the landlords, and is mostly of late been the National Low Income Housing Coalition data, because they do such a phenomenal job, and I urge everyone to look at their website and check out the articles that I've cited. Their annual out-of-reach report for this year, I think due to the pandemic, is not being issued until July 14th this year, so too late for our vote. But the 2020 out-of-reach report, which was actually issued just a day or two after last year's vote, I did rely on this year. And so that data is excellent, bearing in mind that it doesn't even take into account the effects of the pandemic. And then, for your information, Lamont, the NLIHC also relies on the census information and the New York Department of Labor.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Rush.
You're welcome.
Peter, I'm going to call Abraham Hattar.
Mr. Hattar, actually, Chair, if I could, I want to allow somebody to speak who has their hand up, just to identify who they are. I can't tell from their name.
Okay.
So Ellen Dar is being allowed to speak, to identify who you are.
I'm Lynn White.
Okay. You're on the list to speak, so if you could just hold tight until it's your turn to call.
I wanted to respond to what
you'll have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, please.
said, because what you
We're
said
going to go in the order where the people sign up. So if Mr. Hattar is not available, then I'm going to call Dale Oftil. I think I'm
promoting him to a panelist right now, Chair.
Thank you.
Who's that?
Dale, D-A-L-E, Koftil, K-A-U-F-T-E-I-L.
I just have a question.
Yes.
I'm a little confused about Landar.
Landlord, it just says landlord. It's a person that is not identified in here, but it's Lynn White, and she's one of the speakers.
Okay, so why is she though in one of the
She's
boxes?
raising her hand. Why is she still there, Peter?
So right now, I temporarily enabled her to talk so we could identify who she was, but I'm disabling it now, so it'll be gone now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Koftil, I'm trying to promote to a panelist. He keeps dropping off.
if you're having difficulty, maybe we should move to the next person and go back to him.
Let me just try one more time, if I
Okay.
could. I mean, it's up to you if you want to try to call the next person.
Yes, I'm going to call the next person, Ed Nuko.
Ed Nuko is not available.
No? What about Michael Nuko?
Michael Nuko is available.
Okay.
Mr. Nuko?
He's
Hello,
muted.
Mr. Nuko.
Hi,
There
do
we go.
you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
How you
Can
doing?
you please let us know if you are representing yourself or an entity?
Sure. I am representing an entity and myself. So my name is Michael Nuko. I'm a certified.
Can you please tell us what entity?
Sure. It is the entity is the Westchester Owners Association. The companies that I represent are Gem Management Partners and New Realty Advisors, which is a commercial brokerage company. So my name is Michael Nuko. I'm a certified property manager, and I don't have anything very formal prepared, but I just want to comment on the woman that had expressed a lot of emphasis on net operating income. I am an accountant as well by trade. I worked for Deloitte & Touche for many years. Net operating income is collectible, to make it clear, it's collectible rent minus operating expenses. Operating expenses are those things that come no matter what with the territory of a property: taxes, water, utilities, insurance, employees, repairs and maintenance, things of that nature. Then you arrive at net operating income. What we're failing to discuss is that there are several things that come after net operating income, such as paying your mortgage, such as capital expenditures like changing your roof, your boiler, doing a pointing job on the facade of the building. Those things aren't standard operating expenses. They don't come annually. They come at a point in time. So once you go through that waterfall, which is after net operating income, that's when you get to cash flow after debt service, followed by your capital. And to be clear, a lot of folks here on this panel may not be landlords. You folks might have a government job and you collect a salary or whatever the case may be. Being a landlord for some folks, that is their salary. That is it. So once you get to the very bottom and you pay all those bills, now you got to turn around and say, okay, now I have to pay my own bills. Maybe you have rent. Maybe you have a mortgage on your personal residence. Maybe you have children to put through school, insurance to pay for, medical insurance because you don't work for a company and the company isn't offering you some kind of pension plan or some type of medical plan. So we have to be clear on that and be fair to the process. I want to just really make it clear that landlords don't collect their rent. I mean, I have about 500 tenants that I manage. I am actively texting them, speaking to them, holding their hand, trying to bring them into the COVID relief program and doing all we can, writing letters in English and in Spanish, doing everything under the sun. And unfortunately, we don't have the kind of success that one may think. The other thing that you guys need to realize is that some of these properties that we manage may not just only be a residential building. It could be mixed use where you have stores on the bottom. And I think everyone here on the panel understands that the Amazons of the world have really destroyed the retail business. You hear on the news, and if you start reading articles, malls are starting to shut down. They're starting to go into bankruptcy because the retail sector is falling apart. So if you have a building that's mixed use, which is in a lot of situations here in New York, those retail tenants are also hurting. And this COVID relief program is only attributable to residential tenants, not those that have retail as well. I have one tenant that owes me $46,000, and she has a salon, and she also has a deli. They can't pay their rent. And so that's one piece of a building that has a ton of tenants that are not paying. So, there's a lot of things here. I'm not going to try to reiterate the things that were touched upon before, like the deferred maintenance. And yes, the costs of repairs are higher. And if you have to think about the whole effect of our world, we all are suffering. If a landlord is not collecting enough money, especially, with the reaction, the aftermath of the rent law reform, which, as someone stated earlier, eliminated those vacancy bonuses. So that's out the window. All those factors, the MCIs or whatever, is out the window. So now we are relying on these annual rent increases to just compete and try to balance the increase in expenses. Your income is stuck flat on paper, even though you're arguably not even collecting it in full, and your expenses are going up. How do you compete? When you cannot perform repairs, I cannot hire that local contractor. If I cannot hire that local contractor, then that person may be losing money, and that person may not be paying their bills and employing people and paying their rent. So the economy as a whole starts to really collapse rapidly. These are things that we have to all, take responsibility, work together, and try to move this environment, this horrible environment that we're all in, and we got to move it forward. So that's something that's very important. Another thing that I like to mention is that, you turn on the news, you see unfortunate fires and disasters. I mean, I've been monitoring this stuff. How many times you turn on the news and you hear about a fire in a building? How do we know exactly what the root of those problems are? I mean, we could get statistics and really go down into it, but just to point out the obvious, New York, buildings in New York were predominantly built in the early 1900s.
Mr. Nuko?
Yes.
Your 5 minutes are up.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. The buildings are old. We're in 2021. We have a lot of old electric. Think about it. Most people today, unlike in the early 1900s, have computers, iPhones, printers, AC units, things that weren't in existence back in the 1900s. Therefore, the electric wiring that was designed back then for those buildings are not compatible with our buildings today. We must advance our buildings. That requires money. It requires your help. And that's where we are.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Nuko?
I had a question.
Yes, Mr.
Tamara,
Finger.
why don't you go first?
It's all right, Ken, go ahead.
I saw you first.
I lost my train of thought. I remember what it was. If you're going to do some type of capital improvement, I know you mentioned that that's not included in the above the line, so to speak. How about if you had to borrow the money? Is the interest included?
No.
So that's also below the line.
Correct.
Thing.
Correct.
That was my question. Thank you. I'm sorry, Tamara.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Stewart.
I'm just going to use this opportunity because this is at least the second person today that has incorrectly stated that owners can no longer collect MCIs and IAIs. While the formulation for how much they can collect has changed post HSTPA, as somebody who had not one but 2 MCIs that started on my rent this year, I assure you that MCIs and IAIs are still collectible by owners.
Right, but
Well, I'd like to respond to that, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Finger.
There are aspects of the law where things that went into effect before the HSTPA, as possibly your increase, might continue and might be granted. The problem, of course, is that if you're going to spend $100,000 on a boiler or whatever, and you can only get back 2% a year, $2,000, and that is what's allowed. I don't think any of us will be around to see the day when that ends, because number one, in 30 years, you have to take it off your rent anyway. And if this board gave, let's say, a 10% increase, now I know that isn't happening, that increase on top of the 2% would have to be taken off also. So these are, the 2% gets you nowhere. And as far as the IAI is concerned, you know as well as I do that there's a $15,000 maximum payment over 15 years. And $15,000 today, given the cost, I heard the other day that a sheet of plywood is now $80. One 2x4 is $10. The appliances, I have a builder I represent that now has to wait 6 months to get appliances. It just isn't happening. The economy is such that you cannot get the money back for the improvements that you're talking about. Yes, there are exceptions, but within 2 or 3 years, your MCI will be history because nobody's going to do it unless they're put up against the wall and have to do it, and or else have their building fall apart.
Well, forgive me if, I'm correcting the record first and foremost, because people have stated it as if they're not collectible. While they may not be as attractive as MCIs and IAIs were in the past, where some owners took advantage of loopholes and did, MCIs and IAIs that may not have been necessary, but they were trying to push rents up. And keep in mind, okay, the MCIs and the IAIs that have already been passed, people are still paying for those ad infinitum, okay? They are baked into the rents. This is the money for projects that were long since completed, where owners long since got their money back. So forgive me if I just want to make sure that I don't let another person get by and act like MCIs and IAIs are no longer applicable. That is inaccurate.
Well, we're talking 2021, not 2005. So we're looking for the future, and we're looking for what the HSTPA did 2 years ago. And you're right in the sense that there, of course, were MCIs, IAIs. If you hadn't had them for the past 20, 30, 40 years, you would probably have lost half your housing stock in Westchester, New York City. I'm sure, as we heard from some witnesses before, most of the buildings we're talking about were buildings built in, 100 years ago, 80 years ago. These buildings have to be kept up. This is the affordable housing that we have in Westchester. It can't be kept up if you don't have the money to do it. It's as simple as that. Everyone is trying to make sure that the tenants are protected, and we understand that. But we want the tenants to have reasonable, safe, modern housing with modern appliances, appropriate non-leakable units, heat when they can get it. And as Reverend Lofton Woods said, you don't have a building go into the state where you can't get gas for the tenants or the other 88 people that live in our building, which doesn't do anybody any good. So we want a fair shot for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Nuko.
You're welcome.
Peter, I'm going to, are there the previous people, is any of them available now?
I can try to promote Mr. Koftiel again.
Okay.
As an alternative, I can allow him to speak for the time that he would get if you're comfortable with my doing that.
Allow whom to speak?
Mr. Koftiel, who is the individual that I'm having an issue promoting so that we can see him on video.
Okay, so we can he can just we can just listen to him.
I can see if that works.
Okay. Mr. Castillo, are you there? You have to unmute yourself. You're muted. You had to unmute.
I'll send him an email
Okay.
privately and see if I can figure out what's going on. None of the other individuals that you called previously, though, and
Okay, so let's call Mr. Michael McKee.
I'm promoting him to a panelist right now. Mr. McKee?
Hello, Mr. McKee.
Good evening, Chair Rubin, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Michael McKee. I'm testifying on behalf of the Tenants Political Action Committee. I want to first compliment you for freezing rents last year for both 1 and 2 year lease renewals. And I want to urge you to do it again. I think the testimony by Reverend Lofton Woods is very relevant. This would not be the first time that you froze rents for one group of tenants and then left the next group of tenants out just based on when their leases come up for renewal. We have this Russian roulette system of 1 and 2 year lease renewals. Our reform bill would eliminate all of that, would eliminate lease renewals entirely, would eliminate this 2 year rent adjustment, but that's what we're stuck with right now. So I think it would only be fair for you to do 0 and 0 again this year. I'm not going to have time to obviously read my testimony. I sent it in this afternoon. I'm not sure if you saw it yet or not, but I would urge you to read the entire thing. I just want to talk about net operating income and what that means. I mean, first of all, the numbers that you have in front of you do not lie. The numbers show, and these are numbers that are provided by owners of ETPA apartments. They show that for many, many years now, net operating incomes have been on the rise. They are higher than they have ever been since 2002. And despite attempts to minimize what that means by some of the landlord witnesses, it means you've got a picture of a real estate industry in Westchester County that is doing very well. Net operating income is not a precise measure of profit. To actually determine profit, you would need individual tax and financing information for an individual property or a group of properties. But net operating income is a pretty good surrogate. And I'm sorry, a 39% net, 39 cents on the dollar, is a very healthy, even robust net, and is a picture of a real estate industry that's doing very well. The other thing that Table 1 shows you, and I was surprised at this, is that rents held pretty steady from year to year, from 2019 to 2020. They declined by about $79,000 total. I would have expected a much larger decrease in rents collected by landlords because of COVID, but apparently, despite COVID, and despite the 3 months of a rent freeze that is covered by the 2020 income and expense reports, rents have held pretty steady and landlords are not suffering as much as I would have thought they would. I think that, all of this talk about capital improvements, net operating income does not cover capital improvements. That's true, but DHCR, the State Division of Housing and Community Renewal, published a study in 1989. I don't even know if the agency still has access to it. I used to have a copy of it and somebody stole it off of my bookshelf a few years ago. But they did a study of major capital improvements that found that these investments were extraordinarily profitable, that most landlords don't pay for MCIs, for capital improvements out of their cash reserves or their rent roll. Almost all of them are financed. And furthermore, the study found that financing MCIs is more profitable than paying for them out of your cash reserves because of tax considerations. So I think it's a red herring for you even to be talking about or worried about capital improvements. That is really not your function. I do want to comment. Both Mr. Finger and Mr. Nuko referred to interest as below the line. And I want you to read the section of my testimony called Bad Methodology. Some years ago, this board departed from proper methodology, unlike the Rockland County Board and the Nassau County Board, which treat interest as a below the line expenses where it should be. This board instructed the Office of Rent Administration to put it above the line as part of O&M. That is simply improper. It's bad methodology. I've raised this with you year after year. You've never done anything about it. I do think a motion from some of the public members to instruct ORA to put interest back below the line would be very useful. And I want to point out to you that Office of Rent Administration implicitly agrees with us. Otherwise, they would not be doing the second column on the historic cost to income ratio table. So let's get it straight. Now, ERAP, very important. We worked very hard to convince the state legislature to.
Mr. McKee?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but your time is up.
Okay, that was quick. That was a quick 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well,
Let me just say about the rent, one thing about the rent freeze, that if a landlord accepts ERAP funds, they're supposed to freeze the rent for a year. That's
perhaps
correct.
you can
Always worry
continue
about
your
whether
train
that's
of
going to be
thought
enforced.
when somebody asks you a question.
Okay.
Anybody has a question for Mr. McKee? Yes. Yes, Mr. Badro.
Yeah, I was going to give them the opportunity. Can you talk about your concerns with the ERAP program?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
No, I said I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk more about your concerns about the
Oh,
ERAP.
thank you. Thank you. You know, the program that the legislature enacted last year was nothing short of a disaster. We told them it was going to not work, and it didn't work. They did listen to us this year, and I think they pretty much got it right. We think this program is going to be helpful. It's going to make it possible for tenants to avoid eviction, and it's going to make it possible for landlords to pay their bills and catch up. The buzz I'm hearing from OTDA is that they expect that funds will be starting to flow in the next couple of weeks, early July, they said. Some 81,000 tenants have applied since June 1st. There were some problems with the rollout. The website crashed on the first day, but OTDA has worked with us very closely in terms of fixing some of those problems. As Mr. Foley testified, the punitive and restrictive restrictions that were put into the law last year are no longer there. There's no immigration test, so undocumented tenants are eligible for this money as well as citizens. And we think it's going to be a very helpful thing. But I do want to point out to you about the 1-year rent freeze. You have to worry about whether that's going to be enforced and how many landlords are going to simply ignore it. Yes, if the landlord takes the money from ERAP, they're supposed to freeze the rent for 1 year. But I would bet there are going to be many, many cases where landlords are going to ignore that.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Tamara.
I read through your testimony, and as usual, it was excellent. Can you speak to the concerns? One of the concerns that I have in what I've heard so far from folks is the people acting as if the only tenants that have been harmed are the ones that are eligible for ERAP. But I know people who went into their savings, who maxed out credit cards, who, because they did not know that there was going to be relief for renters, they did whatever they could. They borrowed money from people in order to keep up with their rent. Now they've got all this debt that they've taken on, or they've depleted their savings, and they're not eligible for ERAP funds, but they were harmed nonetheless during the pandemic. I know that your organization is actually in touch with a lot of tenants. Have you found that this is also the case, that it's sort of like a hidden tier of people who aren't eligible for ERAP, but who certainly were financially harmed during the pandemic?
Well, it's been a tough 15, 16 months. Let's face it. A lot of people were laid off. A lot of people had their hours cut. I have friends who completely lost their source of income entirely and have been unable to pay rent. I have friends who have struggled and paid some rent, but still owe a lot back rent. I mean, basically, the way ERAP is structured, if anyone is in hardship because of anything related to the pandemic, they should qualify. And I would also point out to you that there was an additional $100 million of state funds that the legislature appropriated, which is supposed to be used for people who are above 80% of AMI. Now, we don't know how OTDA is going to administer that. And so far, they're only talking about the main fund, which by federal law is restricted to households with incomes of 80% or below of AMI. But there is an extra $100 million that is supposed to be used for people who are above that income threshold, who might or might not benefit from it. So it's just been a very tough year, and I do hope that this program is going to make a very big difference, and it's going to. I know people for whom this is not going to cover the entire arrears, who owe more than 12 months rent, because for most people it will cover up to 12 months rent. In some cases, the ERAP funds can cover up to 15 months rent. But if your back rent is now cleared, or a substantial amount of your back rent is cleared, and you don't have an income going forward, you're going to be in trouble. So at some point, the legislature and Congress is probably going to have to deal with that. But we do hope that these funds will start flowing well before the August 31st expiration of the state moratorium on evictions. But there's no guarantee about any of this.
Mr. McGee, I'm sorry. I read your testimony, and I appreciate the time that you take to educate us. And however, I have a big objection about the characterization that you give to this board, that we just follow whatever was done last year. I assure you that there are new people in this board. There are old people, or people that have been, I don't want to say old people, people who have been here previous to me, and they all take their time and their effort to come to conclusions that are the best to our knowledge and the best to our abilities. So I didn't like that.
I'm sorry, I don't know
wanted
what
to
you're
mention it to you.
actually referring to. I don't quite understand what your complaint is.
There was a sentence, I don't have the paper in front of me, but you said that this board just does whatever was done the year before.
No, that's not what I said. I said that all of the boards, all 4 of the rent guidelines boards, I'm talking about methodology, that all 4 of the rent guidelines boards, including the New York City board, have a tendency to do the research the same way every year. That's what I was referring to. And there's a syndrome of we've always done it this way, so we'll continue to do it that way. That's my comment about the methodology, not about the substantive decisions that you have to make as a board.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Anybody else has a question? Thank you, Mr. McKee.
Thank you.
Peter, can we call Len Spano?
Mr. Spano does not look as though he's here.
So the next person I have in my list is Bridget Rocha.
Yes, she's here, and I'll promote her now.
Thank you. Hello, Miss Rocha. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Are you-
So I'm representing an organization.
Great. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening to all. My name is Brigitte Rocha. I have worked for 19 years now for De Rosa Builders, a family-owned and operated landlord. Managing buildings with rent-stabilized unit has become harder and harder with the passing of each year. This past year was probably one of the most challenging years so far. Some of the challenges we already faced on a daily basis became harder to deal with, while new challenges surfaced. Unfortunately, many of our residents lost their jobs, which affected their ability to pay rent. Some just did not pay any rent for months, or others paid whatever they could. We did everything we could to assist them during these trying times. We offered payment plans and agreed to let some residents downsize to another unit while carrying rent in arrears, which meant added expense for us because now we had to renovate the unit they moved out from. We made sure our residents had a home, even when they could not pay rent, while we still had to pay the electric bill, the elevator maintenance, the insurance, the taxes, the payroll, the water. I also would like to address the fact that we currently have a resident who was delinquent pre-COVID. We had a court date set for March 19, 2020, which was canceled due to COVID. He never lost his job. He just stopped paying his rent. He currently owes over $19,000. June 1st, I reached out to him to let him know about ERAP. I emailed him, I called him, I started the application for him. I tried to set up an appointment to meet with him so we could finish the application. He never came through. One time, we had an appointment at 1 p.m. on a Friday. He sent me an email the next day to tell me that he had to take a nap. Today is June 21st, 2021, and he has yet to submit the application. Applying to ERAP does not mean that the application is going to be approved or that 100% of the rent in arrear will be paid to the landlords. Additionally, it seems some residents will not apply for ERAP as they are comfortable not paying their rent and take advantage of the moratorium on evictions. Another challenge we had to face was the increase of our vacancy rate. We went from a 3% to a 10% vacancy rate in less than a year, with units sitting vacant for more than 6 months. A unit that is not rented for 6 months is income we will never get back. ERAP does not cover this lost income. We suddenly found ourselves competing with Class A buildings that were also affected by the pandemic and started lowering their rents drastically and offered promotions such as 2 months of rent-free. Most of Class A buildings are newly built and have brand new everything inside the units and offer amenities such as gyms, patios with grill, etc. We do not have that. Some of our residents who thankfully were not affected financially by this pandemic and to whom we actually offered a lease renewal with no rent increase decided to move out to a Class A building because the 2 last months of rent were free, and for $200 more, they had a gym. Building Class A do not face the restrictions we face with rent stabilized units. They can raise their rents accordingly to how the rental market is doing. They do not have to keep track of the legal regulated rent of each unit. They do not have to submit pictures of the before and after refrigerator they replace or keep proof of payment for that appliance. Lastly, we saw the cost of operating of our building increase exponentially, which ERAP is not going to cover. For example, a stove went from $470 to $500. It's an increase of 6.38%. A refrigerator went from $566 to $597. It's a 5.48% increase. A light bulb went from 93 cents to $1.25. It's an increase of 34%. And I could go on. To conclude, we have been faced with loss of income and expenses that keep on rising. ERAP is not going to cover that. For us to be able to maintain our buildings and provide good housing accommodations to our residents, we need help. We no longer should carry the burden of 0 rent increase rates. I think that 3.5% for a 1-year lease and 4.5% for a 2-year lease would be fair and would be a good start in helping landlords. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Rocha.
You're welcome.
Great timing.
Thank you.
Anybody has a question for Ms. Rocha?
I didn't hear the increase she suggested.
3.5 for a 1-year and 4.5 for a 2-year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Thank you. Oh, yes, Mr. Labor.
Just out of curiosity, how many units do you own, and where are they distributed throughout the county?
I work for the Rosa Builders, 3 buildings, 400 unit on Lake Street in White Plains.
So you are an employee of Lisa DeRosa?
Yes, proudly.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
No, thank you for your time.
Peter, is Len Spano around, or any of the others that we missed before?
I can try to promote Dale Coffteal again.
Okay.
Maybe we demoted him rather than promoted him.
Actually, looks like he just dropped out. So
Okay. So
no-
we'll move to Antoinette Rose.
Yes, I'll promote her now.
Who's that, Madam Chairwoman?
Antoinette Rose, representing the tenants.
Antoinette Rose. Okay, thank you.
Hello, Miss Rose.
Hello.
Can you tell us if you are representing yourself or an entity?
I'm representing an entity.
Which entity is that?
1199 SEIU.
Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm loud enough. Good evening, board members, Westchester County residents, and interested guests. My name is Antoinette Rose. I live in Mount Vernon, and I work for the Montefiore Medical Center in Terrytown. I am a proud delegate for 1199 SEIU Union, the country's largest healthcare worker union with over 450,000 members, over 12,000 of whom lived in Westchester County. I appeared before this body last year to tell you about how badly the pandemic was affecting me and my coworkers. Today, I am back to give you an update on how 1199 members are doing and to respectfully request that you freeze rent for Westchester tenants. Every day, the members of 1199 SEIU save lives, deliver babies, and care for the sick, seniors, and people with disabilities. We are frontline caregivers in hospitals, nursing homes, home care, clinics, pharmacies, and all other areas of the healthcare industries. We are nurses, nurse aides, techs, lab workers, clerks, housekeepers, dietary workers, transporters, pharmacists, social workers, and many other types of medical professions. We are the healthcare heroes that inspired the noisy 7 p.m. tributes during the pandemic. My co-workers and I faced many challenges and suffered many losses over the past 15 months, and our struggles continue. While most of our members kept our jobs during the pandemic, hundreds of our members caught COVID. Some became seriously ill, and sadly, some died. I attended another one of my coworkers' funerals just this Wednesday. Due to the high cost of housing in our county, many of our members had a hard time paying rent even before COVID, and the pandemic just made things worse. Many of our members' household required multiple people working, multiple shifts to pay for rent, food, childcare, and other necessities. Some of our members had to quit their job or reduce their hours to stay home and take care of their children while daycare centers and school have been closed. Some family lost income due to layoff, reduction in hours, illness, or death of breadwinners last year. Some of our members have only managed to pay rent by using their savings, withdrawing money from their 401ks, or running up their credit cards. While we thank God for the vaccines that are saving lives and helping our country to reopen, many 1199 members are still regularly visiting food pantries, slowly digging out of debt and struggling to deal with grief from their loss of family, friends, and co-workers. For many, it will be several years before we can financially return to where we were in March 2020, if we return at all. If this board truly appreciates the sacrifices the healthcare workers made during this worst of the pandemic, then please help our rent-stabilized members recover financially by freezing rent again this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Any
Can
questions?
I-
Yes.
Yes, I have one thing. Where is it? Can I upload my statement to the email that Peter sent me so everyone on the board can have a copy to read?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes, you can.
Peter will let you know where.
Sure, Ms. Rose, the email I sent you previously with the instructions to join tonight, you can just respond to that and send me any upload and I'll forward it to the board.
Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Rose? Yes, Ms. Santiago.
It's not a question, just a comment. I just wanted to thank you and all the frontline workers for all the sacrifices that you made during this pandemic. It is very much appreciated. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Rose, for your presentation. And we're looking forward to seeing in writing.
You're welcome. I will submit it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, can we promote Isabel Hoyos?
Yes, I'll promote her right now, Chair.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Okay. I'll just speak then because I don't want to hold this up for too long. I appreciate all your time and allowing me to speak tonight. I am myself an owner. I would like to just reiterate a couple of the points that were already spoken by some of the other owner representatives. Firstly, we are extremely thankful for the ERAP program. However, it still does not account for pre-COVID arrears that are still not made up. And like some of the other owner representatives said before, we as well have people that were in arrears prior to COVID who were in court and their court dates got pushed or canceled, and they still have not made up the arrears and instead have fallen further into arrears. In addition, the ERAP program requires that all applicants be at or below 80% of the median income. However, many of our residents do not qualify under this category. I'd also like to reiterate the point that months of vacancies are going by with no income coming into us. And since 2019, there has been no vacancy bonus, which during these times would help make up for some of this loss. In addition, we have had many capital improvements that have needed to be done over the past year, including elevator repairs, laundry room repairs, leaks in roofs that altogether have cost us over $100,000 within the year of 2020. At a 0% increase for 2 years, it is becoming unacceptable and unreasonable. Prices are still increasing, and if another year passes of 0%, many more people are going to sign up for a 0% 2-year increase, and it will leave us in an even worse position. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? You unmute yourself, Mr.
Yes,
Finger.
I just did. Thanks. Where is the building that she's the owner of?
We have 2 in Mount Vernon as well as New Rochelle.
And how big are they?
One is 16 units, the other one is 35.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Hi, have you been assisting your tenants who may need the help in completing their ERAP paperwork, Miss?
Yeah, the first week of June, I would like to say the second or third after some of the technical difficulties were resolved on the website. I did have phone meetings as well as in-person meetings with each of our tenants who would qualify for ERAP. We have completed all the paperwork and we're now just waiting for funds to be assigned as well as a case manager to be assigned. However, we still have people in arrears who would not qualify for ERAP nor refuse to apply for whatever reasons they seem fit.
Might I suggest that for tenants who may be a little bit reluctant, and I do know that sometimes, depending on the relationship that some tenants have with their property managers, that referring people to Mount Vernon United Tenants, which is a trusted partner in the community, people may be more receptive to getting the message and getting the information from a different source.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, especially in Mount Vernon. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, Ms. Santiago.
Yeah, I was just curious, and this is not just for Isabel, but anyone who can answer the question. What are some of the reasons that tenants might be hesitant to apply for ERAP?
Personally, I wouldn't necessarily know. I would say that throughout the past year, I've developed a very close working relationship with some of our tenants since we have tried to be so understanding. I know that some people have been denied assistance before from previous programs, such as the COVID rent relief program that was released last year. So I do believe they're just hesitant to complete the work and jump through those hoops just to be denied again.
Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Just as an added piece of information, Miss, the city itself is sponsoring a Zoom on Thursday at 6 o'clock, the workshop on rent arrears assistance. And that's being sponsored. It's a Zoom that's 6 o'clock on Thursday, the day after tomorrow. And if you just check with the planning department at Mount Vernon City Hall, you can get the information to share with your tenants, or you can refer people to them. But I do know that the city itself is trying to do its part to kind of help the tenants who need help, and then to connect the tenants and the landlords so that they can apply for the funds that are available to help folks.
Thank you for that information.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Hoyos. Peter, I would like to call Francesca Del Monte.
Okay, I'm promoting her now, Chair.
What was the last name, Elsa?
Del Monte,
Del Monte. Okay.
Delmonte.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Ms. Del Monte, you're on mute and we can't see you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you. We cannot see you.
I don't know why. I'm sorry.
Okay. Are you representing yourself or an entity?
I'm representing myself. I'm the owner of two multifamily buildings in White Plains, New York. One is about 30 units and one is 50 units.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I really feel we need to consider an increase that will allow for us to make necessary improvements and follow through with pending renovations. This year alone, I've had to put various renovations and improvements on hold. And as we all know, this is not only impacting the landlord. Even at a 1 or 2% increase, we are not even slightly making a dent in the debt accrued during 2020. And most tenants this year alone selected a 2-year option at 0%. I have had at least 5 tenants that we started the legal process for prior to the court shutting down and the eviction moratoriums. These tenants have not made a single rent payment since, nor have they returned our calls in an effort to support and assist them with the ERAP program. One of my tenants that was legal prior to the moratorium owes close to $20,000 and recently, as of last week, moved out in the middle of the night. How are we supposed to recover from this debt, especially with the increased costs of supplies, labor, and gas? As stated earlier, we are definitely grateful for the ERAP program. However, this program will only be beneficial for those that we can get to comply and take advantage of this program. I've reached out to multiple tenants, text messages, calls, emails, having supers knock on their doors, and they're not responding. Do I have an answer as to why? No. But, you know, this is, I think, some of the barriers and the difficulties we face. Now, I'm not speaking for every tenant. There are tenants here that we know are really facing difficulties, that have lost their jobs, that are trying to feed their families. But at the end of the day, I do know that there are some people taking advantage of this system. And I think that that needs to be recognized and heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Del Monte? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Hello. Once again, I do understand that there are folks that it can be difficult to get to them with regard to the information. Some tenants have had really bad experiences with their landlords and avoid them as a result, without knowing whether or not the landlord is trying to communicate with them about something good or something bad. Mostly because usually when the landlord is trying to get in touch with them, it's about something bad. You may want to contact the county's planning department, which is loosely coordinating the nonprofit organizations throughout the county that are reaching out and helping tenants with ERAP application. It may be that if you partner with some of the local organizations or with the county to try to have somebody different who the tenant may have a different relationship with, reach into them to inform them about the program and to offer assistance, that they may be open to it. I'm not saying you're a bad landlord or that, you know, your people don't want to talk to you. I have no idea why whoever isn't responding, but I do know from my own experience in talking to tenants that there are just some that are naturally suspicious and or reluctant to deal with their landlord, and especially if they're way behind on their rent. So if you want to try a different approach, please contact the county planning department and or some of the local nonprofits, if you don't know, the county planning department can tell you who's in your area and see if maybe you can't work towards getting these people to apply for ERAP through a trusted partner.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that advice. And I just find it hard because, we're not writing letters, slipping the ERAP form with instructions on how to apply under their doors. And, so obviously we are coming from a place where we're trying to help them. So they should get that at that point. I just think that, and I'm speaking for a handful of tenants, obviously. But I just think that that is definitely one of the biggest barriers we're, facing with trying to take advantage of these funds.
I know that a lot of owners may not think about it, but there are a lot of people who are in low to middle income. They don't have broadband. They may not be technologically savvy. That's one reason why we haven't been seeing a lot of them in our Zoom meetings, etc. There is a real technological educational divide between owners in general and tenants in general. So what may be something that's very clear to you as an owner that, well, obviously these papers, and you can read them and interpret them and then follow the instructions on them, and then you have the resources to go and complete an application. If you were to have been in that situation, I have met people that need a lot of hand-holding. I knew that from when I was out doing the census. There are people who could not complete the census without somebody there to hold their hand. Trust and believe, if they couldn't do the census and answer those questions without assistance, they need help, and I mean substantial help to do the ERAP application.
Anybody else?
Yes, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Blaine?
Yes.
Elsa, yeah. I just wanted to actually sort of repeat what Ms. Stewart said as well. Again, I know we said this the last time in the last meeting, is that the agencies are really out there waiting to hear from people to assist with this ERAP assistance. They're really waiting. And it's also a great resource. The agencies out there, the landlord representatives, whomever, who's ever out there to help. The landlords can reach out for assistance. The tenants can reach out for assistance. And, Google, I know some people are not technologically, there, but it's important to get as much information on what agencies are participating and assisting with this program in your area. Everybody's trying to help one way or another. So just, reach out to the county, to your city, to your municipality, whomever, wherever you can get the help, just, try to get that. Because not everyone is receptive to everyone and comfortable with everyone assisting them also. So, there's quite a bit out there. It's a lot, and it's a lot of work. And it's also intense work. So it's expected that some people will, whether it's if they're having literacy in, issues, know that, no one knows that. So it's good to get helping agencies out there involved. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Peter, regarding, Eddie May, you want to talk?
No.
Peter, I have a question regarding this matter. Is the website for your organization have any information about this?
To be honest with you, Chair, off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Maybe April knows?
I know that April's on the line. I'll defer to her if she knows.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that anything's on our website because it's not being run by our agency any longer. The last year's program was run through part of DHCR. So for this, they would have to go to the correct website. probably through the governor's office. But I'll look it up right now and see if I can get you some information before the end of your meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miss Del Monte.
Thank you.
And Peter, can we promote the next person, please?
Sure, that
I
would
have
be,
in my list Dennis Hanratty.
yes, I'm promoting him right now. Mr. Hanratty, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. We can't see you though.
You can't see me. Start. Can you see me now?
No.
All right, I mean, it's share, what do I put? Share screen? No.
No, that wouldn't be it.
The video, it's the video.
Just a video.
Start video, and it's on, I hit that. How's that?
Now we can
Oh,
see you.
now
Hello.
we see you.
Maybe you don't want us, I don't know.
Welcome.
Thank you, welcome to you guys. Did you guys receive my statement?
Yes, we did.
Rather than me read this out, I'd rather just talk about a couple of other things if you already have my statement. Is that okay?
Okay. You have, you're representing an organization,
Yeah, I'm the
correct?
director of Mount Vernon United Tenants, and I'm representing them tonight. But I probably
So
won't need the whole 5
You
minutes.
have 5 minutes.
I'm not going to read the whole statement. I probably won't even need the full 5 minutes. You guys can read that yourself. I'd just like to respond to a couple of the issues. We're one of the agencies that people have been talking about that are helping people fill out these applications. So people can come here, landlords or tenants. We get a couple of applications out every day. Plus, we're referring people to the website where they can do it themselves if they so choose. Probably over 50 people to that, and we've already completed about 20 applications. We also participate, you mentioned the county. We participate with the county planning commissioner and with about the 15 other agencies that are doing this. We have a weekly check-in to go over the process about how many people are doing the application, how many people are getting referred. So there is a coordinated attempt. Just today, I got an email from the county executive's office about new flyers that they have out there. And there's going to be a flyer coming out, I believe, tomorrow that's going to list all the agencies. So that should be helpful for people as well. I know you brought that up about not being knowing where to go. That stuff is going to be available from the county. Plus, anybody can call my office. We'll provide any of that information. Feel free to promote my phone number to anybody who calls or gets in touch with you. We can do that. Now, we talked a little bit about some of the rents and stuff like that. What I've talked about the last number of years, as a lot of the hearings, and nobody else seems to pay attention to, the landlord's real big source of income has been vacancy allowances. They've cleaned up on vacancies over the years. That's why you can't find the rent regulated apartment now for under $1,800, $2,000 on the market. They've gotten so high, more and more landlords are doing preferential rents because they can't even rent apartments. They're so high, they're beyond the market. So, there's stuff about them needing this stuff. And nobody's gone out of business now, even without all this money they're not collecting. So they're going to be getting a lot of money under ERAP. And I recognize that's not improvement money. That's money that's owed to them, but it's going to be a huge, huge input into their operating costs. So the last thing tenants need right now is a rent increase on top of that. I think it's very, very clear that the tenants who didn't receive the 0 and 0 guidelines last year options, they have that this year. Those tenants have got to be protected, especially coming out of this pandemic. Every day we get calls from people who've lost jobs, who've had their hours cut, who've had other expenses related to the pandemic, who just can't get by. We deal with that on a day-to-day basis on a grassroots level, and the pain and suffering that people are experiencing is real. And the rent increase is the last thing people need to hear about right now. I mean, people always ask me that, is my rent going to be all right for a while? And we do say, and one of the things I think that makes it easier for you guys is about no increase, is the fact that acceptance of the ERAP funds requires them to not raise the rent for a year. And like Michael McKee, Brent mentioned you that before, what's the enforcement of that? But I think that's just so obvious. They're not going to, a good number of people are going to be eligible for ERAP. They can't pay increases anyway. So there should be, this guidelines board should not pass any increases based upon all of that. Where Tamara mentioned also about a workshop this Thursday night. I'm holding up, people can see that. Mount Vernon Planning Department is sponsoring that with us and with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. I'll be doing a Zoom presentation right from this office on that. And you can see that one of the first things is a workshop on rent arrears assistance. So we're working day in, day out on this, trying to inform people about their rights, the tenants, and how to go about making the process of the applications, informing landlords when they call. We've helped a good half dozen landlords with filling out the application and referring them. So we're in this, right to the end with everybody. We're trying to get, tenants aren't going to get this money. This money's going to go to the landlords. We're knocking ourselves out to get the landlords money that's owed to them, and because they do that, we don't begrudge them that. But the last thing anybody really needs now, and outside of landlords, is a rent increase now. Given the circumstances, the dire economic situation tenants are facing, they can't be subjected to any more increases at this time. They deserve the same benefits that tenants whose leases expired last year have received. So we're calling, my organization is calling for 0 guidelines for 1 and 2 year renewals. I mean, if anything, as Michael McKee mentioned and Genevieve Roach, you can make an argument there should be a reduction with the numbers, what they show, with the net operating income. I think both Genevieve and Michael presented very, very compelling economic arguments. Mine is more about the social arguments that our members are experiencing. But feel free to promote my phone number to anybody who's interested, landlord or tenant, on how to fill out the ERAP application. Like I say, we're doing that around the clock. And that's, I guess, all I have to say. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Hey, Dennis.
Hey, Tamara.
Anecdotally, are you also finding that there are people who made sacrifices financially to keep up with their rent? Liquidating savings, maxing out on credit cards, etc., to try to stay current with rent during COVID?
Yes,
And
I haven't seen a lot of that, but I have seen, there's been a couple, yes.
Yeah, but then now they're not eligible for ERAP. Like if they would have stopped paying their rent and then held on to what they had, they'd be getting relief right now through ERAP. But because they sacrificed in order to keep up with their rent, they've got the financial burden of debt that they cannot recover because the ERAP program does not recognize that they were harmed because they managed somehow to keep up with their rent.
No, you're right. That we've had a number of cases like that. Not a real lot, but unfortunately, the ERAP program has just come out fairly recently. So people were trying to keep up all along. Remember, this is going back to March 13th of last year. So people, like you said, some of our clients, some of our members, did whatever they could just to keep current, not realizing there was going to be money available towards the end. I mean, it's great. The ERAP program is a phenomenal program. And like so many people have mentioned, they've learned a lot from the year prior when they made a lot of mistakes with the administration of the program. This one looks like it's going to be good, even though the money hasn't started flowing yet. They're expecting it to start coming out in early to mid-July. So we have our fingers crossed that it's going to go smoothly from there. And like I say, my agency and other not-for-profits are working, every day, all through the week, about helping people process applications and trying to monitor them. Like I say, every Friday at 11 o'clock, we have a check-in with the County Department of Planning and all of the 15 or so agencies that are processing these applications.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Santiago.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Tamara's question, Dennis, is there any indication that there will be any type of program to help those tenants who sacrificed, went through their savings, borrowed from people, borrowed from their retirement, and are currently either unemployed or underemployed? Is there anything in the works for those people?
Not that I'm aware, but as you're aware, there is part of the ERAP will allow people for up to 3 months after they're caught up on the rent. So maybe that would be available if they couldn't pay it this time. And as Michael McKee had mentioned before, we're fully expecting, or well, not fully, but somewhat expecting that this to be revisited by the state legislature and ultimately by the county then to make this happen for future things. Because we don't think it's a magic number after 3 months, after the 12 months, everything's going to be hunky-dory. There's going to be continuing problems. So there's going to have to be some legislative initiatives down the road. And, we'll participate in that to the degree we're able to. We'll lobby for greater benefits to be available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to say something?
Yes, Ms.
Yeah. Yes. Dennis, hi, how are you?
Good. How are you, Valeen?
Good, good. It's good to see you. And I'm glad you're here to also, give information on how people can get help.
Yeah, well, Valeen, let me just say, the poster that I'm showing, people can come and get this. This tells you how to get involved in our tenants' rights workshop on Thursday evening. Like, we're co-sponsoring with the city. So people can come to my office to get copies of these if they'd like, for their buildings and for the stores. We're flyering the neighborhood. We're posting these stores up on Gramerton Avenue, on 4th Avenue, on Mount Vernon Avenue. We have these both in English and in Spanish.
That's great. Wonderful. I just got an email actually with that flyer.
Okay, good.
From City Hall. Yeah, that's great. It's out there. Yeah, the help is out there. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, we're working very closely with the planning department. And I don't know if people are aware of it. The planning department has hired the city has hired a few new code enforcement officers. They've recognized, we've been working with the county, the city's planning department over the last couple of years on what's called the City's Rise program. And they've recognized, Mount Vernon's got a very aging housing stock. And so, especially landlords haven't always had the incentive to keep their buildings up as long as they know their tenants can't go anywhere else. So they don't always maintain the buildings as well as they should. So we're going to have a more robust code enforcement system coming up. They've hired 2 new code enforcement officers, and they're going to hire a 3rd one as well. So we're excited about that. We think that's going to help really maintain services for tenants throughout town.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Lamont, you're muted. Okay, good.
Wanted to say,
Hey, Lamont.
and thank you for the work that you do. I think you make a really big impact, and I've witnessed it personally. So, just wanted to give you a shout out and say thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Well, thank you, Dennis, for your presentation.
Hey, thank
Good
you.
to see you.
Good to see you guys.
I would like to call the next person, Lynn White.
Yeah, I'm promoting her right now, Chair.
Hello, Ms. White.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you.
Well, let's see if I can do anything about that. I don't seem to be able to do anything about that.
So just let us know if you're representing yourself or an organization.
An organization.
Now we can see you. Which organization is that?
The Apartment Owners Advisory Council and the Building and Reality Institute.
Okay, you have 5 minutes.
I am an owner of some multifamily buildings. I have owned these for many years. It has been hard to maintain them because I don't get rent. Probably am owed at the moment about $100,000 in rent. The people who spoke tonight, I don't know where they're getting their statistics, but I know that I've had to put in new refrigerators this year. to tenants who have not paid me rent. And I've done it because they need to have food that's refrigerated. A woman spoke, the Reverend spoke about Con Edison and the leak. And that I'm sure is a very big problem, but I know because I had a leak at one of my buildings that Con Ed took a long, long time to fix the leak. Wasn't my fault, wasn't anything I did. I called them to get it fixed. But it was Con Ed who stalled, not me. So I hear these complaints and I feel that the tenants think that the landlord should not make any money. But we work very hard, just as the tenants work very hard. For some reason, the tenants feel that we shouldn't, we should do everything for free. Well, that just doesn't work out very well. It doesn't work out well for the tenants and it doesn't work out well for the landlord. Then you talk about the capital improvements, the MCIs, the AIA, the IAIs. Frankly, I can't get any money for the MCIs and the IAIs. So you know what? Those apartments will stay vacant. I will do better having that, using that as a loss. The inventory of apartments will go down. That was not the intention of HESPA. So I think that the board should think about all these issues very carefully. Utilities have gone up, insurance has gone up, taxes have gone up, oil is going way up. How are we supposed to pay? Not only that, Section 8. Oh, there's a dent in the wall. You need to get it fixed. A dent in the wall? I think there's a lot to think about here. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. White? Yes, Ms. Stewart.
Ms. White, how many buildings and how many units do you have?
I have 3 buildings in White Plains, 86 units.
And have you been helping your tenants that are in arrears with ERAP applications if they might qualify, Ms.?
Absolutely. I have gotten, there's some who just don't want to do it. And there are also some who make too much money to do it. Not that they pay me. They have other issues. Some were out of work, now are working and are making too much money.
Well, for the ones that may be reluctant, I hope you've been listening to our pleas that landlords contact the county planning department and work with the nonprofits that are trying to reach tenants in your community who
And I
may
will
be
put up
more trusted
notices.
partners.
And I will put up notices and I will again try to help them. I'm more than willing to help them. And I am more than willing to put notices in my buildings, which I've already done, in an attempt to help them.
Well, that's one way, but sometimes, like I said, if there's a trust issue, it may, the information may be more effective coming from a different source.
I agree. And I will try to help them in every way I can. But that's
Thank
still very limiting for the landlord, in this case for me.
Yeah, Mr. Sherson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Ms. White, thank you very much for your testimony. Can you please explain to the members of the board, expand upon why it is that you're not going to rent a vacant apartment that becomes vacant? I don't think, a lot of people on the board, I may understand that, and Mr. Finger may understand that, but if you can explain it to the other members as to why it is that you're not going to rent a vacant apartment these days.
Okay, I have an apartment at one of my buildings. The lady has lived there for 40 or 50 years. I get a whole $647 for that 2-bedroom apartment. To just heat that apartment costs more than the 647. So it is a benefit to me not to rent it. Plus, I'd have to upgrade it. I'd have to put in a new stove, I'd have to paint it, I'd have to put in a new refrigerator, probably do the floors.
And what would the rent be for the new tenant?
Very close to 647. I cannot increase that rent. So
Nice.
it's not worth it to me to rent it. So you're losing stock, housing stock. The whole reason for HESPA was to increase housing stock. They're going to lose it. I'm not going to rent that apartment. There's a studio apartment that just became vacant. I doubt I'll rent it. Again, it's the same reason. I don't get enough rent to make it worthwhile. And I can take it off my taxes. So it becomes more beneficial to me not to rent it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, yes, Lemon. You're on mute. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think, so you said the operating cost of the unit is more than the cost?
Correct.
What's that? I mean, you gotta get off the camera. I'm sorry, guys.
It's okay.
She's cute. Yeah.
I can't hear. If you're talking, I can't hear.
I said, what type of operating costs for these units do you have on a monthly basis that outweigh the rent that you would collect on the unit?
Well, heat, the cost of a refrigerator, the stove. There's a certain amount of electric that goes into it. Maintaining the building. It's a unit I don't have to maintain. And then if the tenant has a problem or an issue, that's a whole nother thing. It just makes it worth what, if I was making money on it, or even breaking even, maybe I'd rent it. But when it comes to losing money, I'm losing money on this apartment. So I don't see the sense in renting it. Except, you would say, well, it benefits certain people, which it does. But I work very hard for my buildings. I am the manager. I'm the landlord and the manager. I work very hard to try to make a buck, just like I'm sure you do.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you for your testimony, Ms. White.
Thank you. Thank all the board.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Peter, I have the last person in my list is Sandra Borducci.
Yep, I'm promoting her right now.
Could you spell that?
Borducci.
Borducci.
Hello, Ms. Borducci.
Hi, how are you?
Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Borducci.
Borducci.
Yes, you did
Okay.
much better than Siri.
Are you
Okay.
representing yourself or an entity?
No, I'm representing an entity. I'm testifying on behalf of two landlords, Radford Management Associates, which is 58 units, and Grand Terrace Associates, which is 38 units, in Southwest Yonkers and Mount Vernon, respectively. According to a case law, Rose Associates versus DHCR, the appellate division indicated that the purpose of the Rent Guidelines Board is to balance the landlord's needs against the tenants. There has to be a rational basis for the determination on the guidelines and considering substantial evidence on both sides. Now that the pandemic is mostly over, keeping increases at 0% seems highly unreasonable, especially since Mr. Hanratty just said that only a couple of Mount Vernon tenants had to dip into their savings. And the case of Casado versus New York City Rent Rent Guidelines Board 2011, the Court of Appeals of New York opined that small annually authorized increases do not come close to covering increased costs. Further, in Rent Stabilization Association of NYC versus NYC Rent Guidelines Board, the Supreme Court of New York in 2017 held that while tenant affordability is a proper factor for the board to consider in establishing guidelines, tenant affordability is not the only factor. The board also has to consider the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in the affected area, including such factors as real estate taxes, utility rates, maintenance costs, operating costs like insurance, government fees, costs of fuel, labor, costs of and availability of financing, costs of living. I'm asking the board to consider a 4 to 5% increase. A lot of these points have been mentioned before, but Mount Vernon real estate taxes increased 13%. After net operating income, which Genevieve claims is 38% profit. Well, real estate taxes at $100,000 a year plus mortgage interest are deducted. So that's huge deduction coming out of profit. We can't evict non-paying tenants. Our union wages are up 12%, utilities 20 to 30%, insurance up 30% because insurance companies found that landlords can't invest the money in their buildings when rents aren't coming in. Most of our tenants were able to pay the rent, but that's because our rents are low. They're preferential and they're below the legal regulated rents. I do the annual rent registrations every single year and I see this. More code enforcement in Mount Vernon. We already get code enforcement from Section 8 and the city. These are just more costs for landlords out of their bottom line. Every code violation in a paying and non-paying tenant's apartment is less in the bottom line. In Westchester, tenants have all the love. During the pandemic, we, like many other landlords, went of our way to help struggling tenants with programs offered by the state and the city. Thanks to the completely pro-tenant ETPA laws passed in 2019, we can't charge vacancy increases. We can't suddenly charge legal regulated rents after charging preferential rents. The RGB gave 0% increases for 1 and 2 year lease renewals. Most tenants showed 0%. If landlords accept ERAP, the RGB passes an increase, landlords may at least have legal regulated rent increases on their rent registrations for the next round of tenants. That could be a positive thing for landlords. You know, all the judges in Westchester are pro-tenant. They got months up to a year, maybe more to pay. And forget about IAIs, because before we might get $10 increase on rent. Now it's more like $1 or $2 increase in rent. One tenant asked me to move to an updated apartment with an updated kitchen. And how could we do it for 0% increase? It's unfathomably low. It just makes no financial sense. $16,000 kitchen with a $1 a month increase. Could you do that if you owned a home? No, that would be ridiculous. Where is the love for landlords? As hardworking tenants know, charity does not pay the bills. For teams of owners, managers, and superintendents who go to work every day to make sure the buildings are operating well, to make sure tenants have gas, electric, heat, hot water, which we pay for, you know, it's tough. We can't turn off utilities or stop paying mortgage, shut off the elevator. And then we have all these administrative duties, filing annual rent registrations, now more code enforcement, ETPA reports. The list goes on. It's intense. Who wants to do this for free? On top of that, tenants, you know, are not all angels. There's drugs, there's domestic violence, there's, you know, someone leaves newspaper on their toaster oven. You know, the whole building's got smoke damage and water damage from the sprinklers. It's a nonstop 24-hour weekend holiday job. This is not a for free job. I'm sorry. You know, if tenants need to get more than one job, that's great. And landlords are not stopping from 9 to 5. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, that's your time allowed me. Anybody has a question?
I do.
Okay, Ms. Aqua?
Yes, no, I may have missed it. Where are the buildings located and how many units?
Southwest Yonkers, Mount Vernon, 58 and 38 respectively.
Okay, thank you.
Taxes are really high. You know, it's ridiculous because they're going to programs, right?
Anybody else?
Or corrupt politicians in Mount Vernon, which we all know have been written about in the papers. So we're paying for it. But we're the
Anybody
only
else?
ones paying for it.
Anybody
No,
else
that's
has a
it.
question?
That's it for me. Also.
Okay, thank you very much for your
Thank
presentation.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Peter, do we have any other previous people that were waiting or not waiting?
No, I was able to email Mr. Koftiel. He said he had technical difficulties. I told him to try to call in, but he hasn't tried to come back on. So other than that, none of the other people who we missed have come on either. So that's the end of the list as far as I have it.
Okay, so that's it for tonight for the presentation. As I said before, our next meeting is on Wednesday, the 23rd. And unless anybody has any other questions or comments, I will ask for someone to make a motion to adjourn the meeting. I knew you were going to do it.
Been a long day.
I know. Thank you very much for your time and your patience, and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good to see you.
See
See you next time.
Wednesday.
Yes.